The river that evening held the light as though it meant to keep it, gold caught in restless ripples, shifting and breaking with the wind. The air smelled of silt and willow, of rain that had passed in the morning and left the earth damp and rich. I remember thinking it was a fine hour for silence. Just me, my horse, and the low hum of the plains. That thought lasted no more than the distance between two heartbeats. It was not the wind I heard next. A voice cut through the air, sharp and high, then cracking in its urgency. It was not the kind of sound a man could mistake. It was a cry that rose from fear so sudden it had no time to shape itself into words. Dusty's ears went forward. I felt the stir in my own chest, a tightening that sent me leaning out of the saddle, scanning the far bank. She stood there, skirts darkened by water, hair loose from its braid, a young woman waving with one arm and pointing with the other. For a moment I thought the river was empty, until I saw the small shape caught in its churn, a child turning in the current like a leaf. The river here was wide, its center faster than either bank, and she was already halfway to the deeper run. I have no memory of deciding. Dusty surged beneath me, hooves breaking the shallows, the water pulling harder the farther we pressed. I swung free of the saddle when the depth took Dusty's footing and dove, the cold closing around me so quick it felt like being struck. The current wanted me too, but my eyes locked on the flash of small limbs, pale against the dark swirl. I lunged, caught cloth, and pulled her in, her weight hardly more than a sack of grain yet heavy with the water she'd swallowed. Breaking the surface, I caught a ragged breath for us both. She was limp in my arms, head lolling. The river did not yield easy, shoving and twisting, but I forced us toward the far bank where the woman waited, her boots sunk in the mud, her hands outstretched. I gave the girl over, and she fell into the woman's arms with a softness that looked like surrender. The woman knelt in the wet grass, her voice breaking into words I didn't know, smooth and urgent, tumbling from her lips like beads from a broken string. The girl coughed once, a weak shudder, then went still again. I dropped to my knees beside them. "She's not gone," I said, though my voice was rougher than I meant. I set my hands to her small chest, pressing rhythm into her, tilting her chin, giving her my breath. Her mother, she had to be her mother, watched my face as though I held her own life there too. Another breath, another press, and then, sudden as the breaking of ice, water spilled from the girl's mouth. She coughed, a cry rose, and her little hands clutched at the fabric of her mother's dress. Relief shivered through the woman's shoulders. She bent low, pressing her cheek to her daughter's hair, murmuring in that language again. I sat back on my heels, my hands dripping river water onto the earth, my chest still tight from the cold. When she looked at me, her eyes held the shadow of fear yet also something else, quiet and searching. She was young, no more than 22 I would guess, but the kind of young worn by years that give nothing freely. Her cheekbones were high, her gaze steady even through the wet strands of hair clinging to her face. "You live close?" I asked. She shook her head, glancing downriver. "Too far. Light will go." Her voice was accented, her words measured. She rose, holding the girl close. "My place is nearer," I said. "You can get warm there." She hesitated. The river gurgled behind us, its surface already closing over the place where her daughter had been. A hawk called somewhere upriver, sharp in the fading air. Then she nodded once, a small movement, and we began walking. The child, Clara, I would learn, was bundled in the woman's arms. I shrugged off my coat and held it out. She took it, not for herself but to wrap around Clara. Her hands moved quick and sure, tucking the edges so no wind could touch the girl's skin. The trail along the bank was narrow, the grass tall enough to brush at our knees. We spoke little. I asked if she had family. She said none nearby. Her husband? "Fever took him," she said, the words almost without sound. After that, she said nothing for a long stretch, and I did not press her. The sun slid lower, pouring the last of its gold into the river, which took it greedily. We came to the rise where my fence ran, the posts leaning like tired men, the wire catching the last light. My ranch house sat beyond, plain and low-roofed, its windows catching fire from the sunset. At the porch, she paused as though stepping onto it might bind her to something she could not yet name. I opened the door and she followed. Inside, the air smelled of wood smoke. I set a fire in the stove and the small room warmed quick. She knelt by the cot I pulled near the hearth, laying Clara down, brushing damp hair from her face. Her eyes stayed on the child even when I set a tin cup of water beside her. "I'm Elena Whitebird," she said quietly. It was offered like a fact, not an introduction. "Silas Boone," I said. The fire crackled between us. Outside, the coyotes had begun their calls, thin and far, the sound barely touching the edges of the night. We spoke in pieces. She told me Clara liked to walk near the river to find stones shaped like eggs. Today the bank had been soft from rain. A slip, a splash, and the current had her before Elena could reach her. She had shouted but no one came until I did. Her voice changed when she said that, the smallest tremor threading through. I thought of the way the town looked at her when she passed, half curiosity, half dismissal. People heard what they wanted, and from the wrong mouths, a cry for help could sound like trouble not worth touching. Clara stirred in her sleep. Elena adjusted the blanket, her fingers brushing mine as I handed it over. A brief thing, accidental, but it stayed in my skin. When the fire burned low, she leaned back in the chair, her eyes still on her daughter. I thought she might have fallen asleep until she spoke again, her voice barely more than the settling of embers. The river took him too, she said. I knew she meant her husband. Outside, the wind moved in the grass, a sound like the hush before rain. I looked at her, at the lines the day had carved into her face, at the quiet defiance still living in her gaze. In that moment I felt the space inside me shift, something loosening after years of holding fast. She caught me looking and did not turn away. The firelight threw shadows against the walls, the kind that made the room feel smaller and closer, as though the rest of the world had slipped away beyond its edges. Neither of us spoke again, but the silence felt less like distance and more like the narrow bridge between two people who had each been alone too long. I did not know if she would stay the night or leave when morning came, but for the first time in years, I felt certain I would listen for her voice. And somewhere beyond the dark, the river kept moving, as if it knew it had given something back that it had no right to take in the first place.